Presented by the Common Sense Institute, welcome to Common Sense Digest, the podcast that seeks to inject a little common sense into Colorado's policy discussion. Here's your host, Earl Wright.
Welcome to the Common Sense Digest podcast. My name is Earl Wright, and I am chairman of the board of CSI. Thank you for joining us today. CSI has just recently published an expansive crime report titled The Fight Against Crime in Colorado, Policing, Legislation, and Incarceration. The report reveals some disturbing trends associated with our public safety system, including rising crime rates, decreasing prison population during that rising crime rates, a growing negative impact on a result of crime. With us today, and to give all the details of his report, is former police chief of Denver, Paul Pazen, who has joined CSI as our public safety fellow. Paul is the former chief of police in Denver, where he rose through the ranks of the department up to his appointment as chief in 2018. During his tenure as police chief, Paul Pazen led the creation and expansion of innovative solutions to address complex public safety issues. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Earl, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. I know we'll get into the report a little bit more here, but as you're talking about the title, The Fight Against Crime, if this is a prize fight, we're losing. We're down on the scorecard, and now's the time to bring awareness to these issues so we can come back and really help the state of Colorado, the people of Colorado, both for their public safety and the economic vibrancy of this amazing state.
Well, it's like any prize fight. It's 10 rounds or whatever, and we may be down on the scorecard, but I have a sense during this conversation you're also going to say, how do we get that scorecard turned around? And that's what I hope we can focus on here, besides saying, hey, how did we get where we are? So maybe we can start on that. You released your first report as CSI's Public Safety Fellow on June 2nd, which looked at many components and benefits of an effective public policy system. To start us off, can you share with us how your public safety system has fared in recent years, how our public safety system has fared in recent years, and why was there a need for this report?
Well, again, thank you. I couldn't be more honored to be a fellow with the Common Sense Institute. I think Common Sense Institute has really served as a voice of reason in pointing out some of the challenges that we're facing in this beloved state of ours. And public safety is one of those major concerns, and it should be. Really, oftentimes we think of safety or crime as a police issue and exclusively a police issue. The police have a major role in this, but the criminal justice system is just that, a system. And we need to make sure that we're looking at all components of the criminal justice system to ensure that they are working at their best levels. That is what can give us the greatest level of success. So you have to look at the laws, and these are the laws that the state legislature and governor have signed and enacted. We took a look. There's 42 laws during this time period, 2010 to 2022, that have severely impacted the ability to keep people safe. You have to look at law enforcement and the support of law enforcement. You have to look at the budget impacts of having enough officers, how you support that in order to address crime, both in a reactive and proactive preventative approach. And then an area that deserves more study and that we have some preliminary data on is the follow-up. What happens after the police officers locate, arrest, solve crime? Are the prosecutors doing their job? Are the courts doing their job? The prison parole system, is it adequately supporting folks to reduce recidivism or preventing that reoffending? Because if they're successful, it's a good thing for all of us in Colorado. Fewer victims and fewer people impacted by the criminal justice system. But really, this report serves as a foundation to look at all of those systems and not just say, well, it's exclusively one component and that's the problem.
It sounds to me, Paul, that you're Chief, that you were talking about a well-coordinated effort within our public safety arena, of which the police are a part of that. But you mentioned the judicial system and you mentioned the district attorney. It sounds like there's an opportunity for us to do a better job. And I want to give you a chance to highlight what you think was perhaps the most important things that you found in the report and where the opportunities might exist where we can maybe improve our public safety.
Well, again, if we're comparing state versus state, if you're looking at Colorado versus the rest of the country, we are doing very poorly. And this is a crime rate per 100,000 residents. Oftentimes, folks aren't paying attention to this and they just assume that a state that's growing in population, that crime is just going up because there's more people coming here. This accounts for the growth in population, and it is based on a rate per 100,000 residents. This is how you could compare California, New York, Florida to some of the smaller states like Wyoming, Delaware, or New Mexico. It's per 100,000 people. And Colorado used to be one of the safer states in the country, and now we are the fourth highest crime rate in the country. Only 3 states are doing it worse than we are. And that's why we have to look at the forest through the trees to say what is working and what's not working. And when you have 42 pieces of legislation, many of which that tip the scales of justice more in favor of the individuals committing crime than the victims of crime, we have to say what is going on, what's working, and what's not working. The report, or one of the bottom lines, is we have this dramatic increase in people that are being victimized by crime. Number 1 in auto theft, number 2 in property crime, number 4 in total crime. Those are all people. Those are all victims of crime. But it is also having a significant economic impact. There is a way to identify the costs of crime. So this is response, investigation, prosecution, incarceration, medical costs, loss of productivity, things of that nature. And last year, the costs of crime in Colorado were $30 billion. Billion, $30 billion.
Hold on a second. $30 billion is the cost of crime, and our state budget, I believe, is like 37 or 38 billion. So you're telling me in 1 year's time, we have about 2/3 of our state, but something equivalent, 2/3 of our state budget is the cost of crime to our state?
Equivalent.
That seems outrageously high. Do you have any thoughts or comments about how we can bring that down or what could be done to hopefully get it under better control?
Well, first, let me give credit to Dr. Byers and the economist that is part of the CSI team. But this is a study. The National Institute of Health had a study by McAllister that studied the direct and indirect costs. So for every murder, for every auto theft, and every crime in between, you can identify the direct and indirect costs. And so the increase in crime that we're facing, if you put a dollar amount to that, it is equivalent to $30 billion. So this is something that impacts all of us, right? Many of our listeners, they might not have been directly impacted by crime itself. Maybe they haven't had a car stolen. Maybe they haven't been the victim of a property crime, a robbery, a burglary, or any severe crime. But it is impacting every person in our community. When we talk about inflation, this is crimeflation. Our insurance rates, if we're number 1 in the country for auto theft, there's a cost associated to that, and those costs are passed on to the people of Colorado. So there is a way to do this. There is a way to reduce crime in a fair and just way, to even reduce prison population in a fair and just way by preventing the crime in the first place. But what this report points out is we got a lot of work to do, and the first step is identifying that we have significant issues, and now is the time to come together to try to get these addressed.
Well, one of the things in the report that I thought was interesting, and I found myself wondering how come. Had to do with the tale of two cities, as referred to it here. It looks at the different approaches and outcomes in policing between Denver and Colorado Springs, 40 miles to the south. Chief, can you speak to what these different approaches that the various departments had, and what were the outcomes for the different approaches they had with regards to funding the departments as well as staffing them?
Well, really, the two largest cities in Colorado, I think that this is a great compare-contrast to see what's happening in Denver versus what's happening in Colorado Springs. Now, I don't want there to be any distraction. Crime in Colorado, the entire state, is up about 32% from 2010 to 2022. So that's across the board, big cities and small towns and everywhere in between. Colorado Springs seems to be doing better than most jurisdictions, and it's really important to take a look at what they're doing to see if there are things that we can learn from. Now, you brought up the budget. Colorado Springs consistently has maintained their police department as their top line budget, right? And this speaks to attitudes and approaches. Public safety is foundational. People will not go visit parks or recreation areas, amenities, if they don't feel safe. And during that time period, Colorado Springs has allocated the top line, the most significant portion of their city's general fund towards the police department in order to keep their community safe. In Denver, that's third or fourth, depending on how you look at it. And that number has actually gone down. A number of uniformed officers has gone down during that relative time period per resident, where in Colorado Springs, it has increased. So that's an important distinction. And really, what the report is finding, a lot of the preliminary results is, as I've indicated, the criminal justice system is just that, a system. It appears that the judicial district, if you compare Denver's judicial district, the district attorney's office, the second judicial district versus the fourth judicial district, the district attorney in Colorado Springs, El Paso County and Teller County there, seem to really take a very strong approach towards dealing with crime. They take a victim-centric approach. They want to reduce crime by holding the individuals accountable for their criminal behavior. And one example of this is both departments, both Denver and Colorado Springs, have very high clearance rates, particularly with regards to murder or homicide. Across the country, major cities are often struggling around 50% solve rate. Denver's got an 80% solve rate, which is above Colorado's average. Colorado Springs has a 73% solve rate, which is above Colorado's average. Those are both indicators that their departments are doing really good addressing these crimes. Now, what the preliminary report shows, and there's going to be follow-up on this to study, is that the 4th Judicial District is filing 94.8% of the criminal cases, meaning if the department is going to go through that trouble, if the Colorado Springs Police Department is going to go through the trouble of solving a case, sure is nice that their prosecutor's office are filing those cases. The early data shows that that's not happening to that extent in the 2nd Judicial District. So more to come on this, but it really points out some differences in attitudes and approaches. And if other components of the criminal justice system are doing their part, prosecuting the cases, or the courts side of things, then you can have dramatically different outcomes. And we are having different outcomes in the two jurisdictions.
Well, you've touched on the district attorneys, and how about their success in Colorado Springs when they bring a case before the judges, and versus possibly here in the Judicial District 2, Denver, when they go before the judges in Denver? Is there any difference between the how the judges may rule on, and I know there's similar, you want to look at similar cases, but can you draw any conclusions about the judicial system outside of what the DAs are doing?
Again, this is why I'm so excited to be a fellow, the public safety fellow for the Common Sense Institute. It's very difficult to get court data, to get outcome data, but future reports are really going to identify what these issues are. I'm proud to be one of many fellows that look at these issues, but we have two incredible fellows that were former district attorneys that can really dig into this, and I'm excited to see what that looks like moving forward. But as we're seeing that one jurisdiction appears to take these cases very serious, appears to put victims first in these cases, and another jurisdiction is taking a much different approach, and crime is up in the area that the seriousness isn't as focused on the victims, and crime is down in the area with a 94.8% filing rate. That is great. The 4th Judicial District deserves a ton of credit for taking on that hard work. And then, actually, I'm just going to sneak this in real quickly. It also appears that the 4th is doing this in a more effective and efficient way. Their budget is much lower than that of the 2nd. So it appears that they're doing more with less and being far more effective, which is something that I think other folks can learn from.
That's interesting. I want to press a little bit about this tale of two cities. And when I think of Colorado Springs, I think of the military. I think of a huge retirement community. I think of a city that is focused on the military and tourism. And I just have to wonder, is the composition of the populace of Colorado Springs contributing to the success of the police department in Colorado Springs versus the composition of the population of Denver, which I oftentimes see it as more youthful, not as many people that are a part of the retirement community, and possibly more migrant oriented than maybe Colorado Springs. Or am I just fishing for a difference that's not there?
Earl, you're fishing, and I think you're in the right area. A couple of things. A good friend of mine often states that you are what you tolerate. And, if you have a constituency that has that military background, you have 4 military bases down there. Really, a lot of those folks that both served in the military or family members see the value and the importance of keeping what the military does, keeping our country safe. And there are, some of those attitudes and approaches that I believe come from that mindset with having a big military, current and former military members that are part of that constituency. And I think that that's reflected in prioritizing the budget. You also need to look at what the leadership looks like in the city. And for many years, just recently, somebody that was term limited out was the former Attorney General of Colorado, serving as the mayor of Colorado Springs. And so really that shows somebody that prioritizes victims in crimes and wants to take these types of issues seriously at the very top, just as the district attorney, Michael Allen, in the 4th Judicial District do it. So attitudes and approaches can, I believe, have an impact on this. And I think that much of this, is based on that constituency, something that you bring up there that can and likely has an impact on this as well.
Chief, I don't want to just focus exclusively on the components of the system. I'd like to also talk about outcomes, more of that if we could. Chief, in your report, you speak at length about the various positive impacts that a successful police force, public safety system, can take for a local community or city. You eloquently just talked about leadership with regards to Colorado Springs, and I appreciate that. What are some of these benefits and positive impacts of a successful police force and public safety system? What are the benefits we're talking about if we have that?
First and foremost, safety is foundational, and the people of a community, the people of a country deserve to be safe. They will not go out and utilize those amenities if they don't feel comfortable going themselves or taking their family to these things that are part of a high quality of life or the vibrancy of a particular community. Now, law enforcement can play a very significant and important role there, both in strengthening that relationship with their community. If you have enough police officers, you can prevent the crime from occurring in the first place. And that's what future studies, our next report, which will be out in a few months, really talks about the solutions. It looks at what has worked in our country in years past, what lessons have been learned on how we can do this in a fairer and more just way. Also looking at what some other countries across the globe are doing, because I contend that we can have lower crime rates and higher quality of life, and we can reduce prison population, and we can do it for about the same amount of money that we're spending now. And so the next report will really focus on the solutions. So I'm very excited to talk about that issue or the solutions in future reports. But when we're talking about building those relationships, if you don't have enough officers, if all they're doing is going 911 call to 911 call, they're spending very little time trying to prevent crime. They don't have enough time to interact with the community and build relationships. And that's a disservice all the way around. It hurts certainly on the public safety side of things, but it also hurts in building future police officers or future members of law enforcement. If you're so busy that you don't get to interact with your community because you have high priority calls waiting for response, it makes it very difficult for future recruitment, for enhancing that relationship and making sure that officers are reflective of their community, that they hear what their community wants and needs. And that's an area that I believe we can learn from and improve upon for the entire state.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that the cost to our state of $30 billion. And it seems to me that there's a whole lot that we can gain by having an effective police force within the state, not just Denver, Colorado Springs. What are some of the recommendations that you're thinking about that would help communities and our elected leaders ought to be thinking of implementing? Can you share some of those with us?
I will, and I'm going to be brief on it because, again, that's the whole focus of the follow-up report here. But, we talked about the tale of two cities, and it appears that there's a different attitude and approaches. And part of the attitude and approach is support, whether that's financial support and actually having a growing police department serve a growing community, or we talk about the support on the back end of this. And we're going to go into far more detail in the second report with regards to the solutions here, but we need elected officials to actually support law enforcement. The women and men that go out and put their lives on the line, that put others above self, deserve support. And if you have city council members, 4 of which in Denver talked about defund, abolish, or decenter, or you have state legislators who are self-described abolitionists and do not support having law enforcement do the very difficult work that they are, it's going to be very difficult for you to recruit and to retain folks in law enforcement. And for several years, we certainly have demonstrated at that highest level of elected officials that there's not that outward support for the people that keep our community safe. And these are mothers and fathers, these are brothers and sisters, these are your friends and neighbors that do this very difficult but very noble work in keeping our community safe. And so we certainly need elected leaders at the highest level to say, we do support law enforcement. We want to make sure that they have the tools, the equipment, and the support necessary in order to keep our community safe.
I have just a kind of a wild question here relative to your experience on the force, and then obviously coming up through the ranks and become chief of police in Denver. For the police officer that's on the beat, that's out there day to day, what would they like to see from the community? Me as an average citizen, people listening to this podcast as average citizens, what would they like to see from us so that they could be even more effective and get better results for our community?
Earl, actually, that's an excellent question, and I'm going to use the word support, but let me kind of dive into what support actually means. So, people, they will not choose to work in an environment where they don't feel appreciated or supported, right? And it doesn't matter what that line of work is. If they are doing a job and they don't feel valued, they don't feel appreciated, they don't feel supported, then often they will choose to move on to a different job or a different profession. When you have folks that have so very publicly talked about defunding, abolish, decentering, highlighted every time that an officer does something wrong, either locally or across the country to justify or advance their agenda, that's very problematic. How would somebody feel supported? Particularly if it's elected leaders that have agency over the officers or the department. They have agency over the department by approving or not properly staffing and budgeting for that particular department. So support means a lot to all of us that do work out there, and it's very important that that support is something that folks see and feel in any and all professions, and particularly in the folks that have this difficult and dangerous but yet very important job of being peacemakers in our community.
Chief, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, writing the report, being the guest on today's podcast. I'm looking forward to the next report. I'm sure I'm expressing this for many people on the podcast. Your years of service and the innovation and initiatives that you took to improve the overall public safety for our city, I appreciate it against some very difficult odds. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Earl, thank you. Thanks for the kind words. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Common Sense Digest. For more on today's topic, as well as our research on the most pressing public policy issues facing Colorado, please visit commonsenseinstituteco.org. The preceding episode, along with all others, is available on podcatchers everywhere, or on our website under the podcast tab. Our technical producer is John Ekstrom and Deft Communications. This has been a production of the Common Sense Institute.